Acts chapter 17, starting at verse 16 today. We're picking up where Paul left off. If you remember, he had the dream, went to Macedonia. He went to Philippi, Thessalonica, Berea. He keeps getting chased out. He's making converts along the way. And this is I think this is so important for us not to forget. Because although he's getting run out of these places, he's also been planting churches as he's been going along. People are coming to believe. Churches are beginning to form, and people are coming to Jesus. People are clinging to that salvation of the cross. And it's what a wonderful thing. And despite all of the danger to Paul's life, Paul just continues to persevere and go into danger time and time and time again. And finally now he was sent to Athens from Berea. I'm not certain why they sent him to Athens. It just says they wanted to send him to the coast. I don't know if they're like, hey, we need to get you on a ship out of here or what. But either way, he's in Athens, and he's waiting for, it says when Paul was waiting for them in Athens, that would be Timothy and Silas, because he had to go ahead of them because they were really angry with Paul. And so Timothy and Silas were trying to help get the church going. It says he was greatly distressed to see that the city was full of idols. And this made me think, what would Paul think if he saw North America today? Because I remember this was one of the things. I'm an early Christian in the early 2000s, and American Idol is the biggest show on TV. And I remember even that name made me feel uneasy because I remember thinking, it's like, I understand we're not literally going up and worshiping these individuals, but it is a slippery slope that we build up in our world. And in fact, there are people that worship these people, that praise these people, that follow these people all around the world. I mean, Taylor Swift just finished that crazy tour, and they were running into these crazy fans that would make it onto TV who were literally following her from city after city after city, and they wanted to make sure they got to go to every last bit of this Taylor Swift. And it's like, she's just a human being who sings, you got to be careful here, make sure there's no Swifties nearby, mediocre songs. Right? It's not that impressive to me. And yet we do this. We set up these idols in our lives, and I don't know whether it's from some deficiency in our own life where we see these things in someone else and we find them praiseworthy, or what. I don't necessarily know. Obviously, I would have my own temptations. It's not Taylor Swift. But right, we all have these temptations in our lives of idols, of things that call us out of worship. And here's a great test. And I remember I would put this in front of myself as well. I remember thinking this as when I first started coming to church, because I really started to notice there are a lot of these things in the world that try to pull you away from church, especially Sunday morning worship service. There's a lot of things. And Brittany, you can attest to this. Every sporting event decides they want to book it on Sunday morning. I don't know. So for those who don't know, I was big into bowling when I was a teenager, and I was really good at it. I did really well, would go to a lot of tournaments and stuff like that. I remember I got saved, and I would skip tournaments because they would be on Sunday morning. Because I started to realize, wait a minute, these are these things that are trying to pull me away from God. So why? I'm not going to let it do that. I think Jesus is more important. And many of us have these things in our lives. We have these it's almost like a magnetic draw, and it's just trying to pull us away. And the worst part is that we're really good at saying, yeah, but, right? We're really good at that. We talked about this a little bit last week where, we love to come up with excuses because it makes us feel better about ourselves. And I think this is why we hear so commonly the phrase, yeah, but I'm a good person, right? Because we don't really want to own up to the level of sin we have in our life. And we don't really want to admit, to be honest, even the level of temptation that's in our lives a lot of the time. And I think that's a problem because temptation isn't the sin, right? I want to make that extremely clear. To be tempted by something doesn't mean you've done anything wrong. But if you're honest about your temptation, especially with those around you, then you will have a community of people that will help you deal with your temptation, right? That'll help you keep away from the things that are actually pulling you away from God. This is why it's so important for us to be a community of believers. And this, and of course, maybe we don't have wooden idols, we don't have stone idols around, and we're not going around falling in worship and offering sacrifices. But how many of us sacrifice our time and money and praise even to other worldly things? And I'm not just talking about entertainment, because I don't want to make it all about entertainment or athleticism or anything like that. Like that these are inherently bad things. I don't think that at all, right? I think entertainment can be good, and I think definitely athletics are very good, because otherwise you end up looking like me, and you don't want to do that. You want to, stay in shape. You're giving me that face, but remember, I was about 70 pounds lighter when I first started here. I was much skinnier. You gotta stay active. You gotta do these things, but we gotta make sure that we don't allow these things to become idols in our life. That we don't end up sacrificing our time and money, and worship especially. Worship, which is our adoration, our love, our affection to these things. And it can be such a slippery slope and so easy for us to do this. But why was Athens like this? Why was Athens so full of idols? Because Athens was a center of learning. It was a hub of culture. Certainly in the time of Alexander the Great, which wasn't that far back from this. That's certainly when Athens reached its peak. And then, of course, under Rome, although Athens was no longer the center, right? Rome was obviously that under the Roman Empire. But Athens was still very, very important, right? It was the seat of some major thinkers like Aristotle and Epicurus and of course the Stoics and stuff like that, which we're going to be reading about here today. And so this hub of culture also brought with it a lot of religion. And we're going to be getting into that today. It said he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and the God-fearing Greeks, as well as in the marketplace day by day with those who happen to be there. Which also leads me to this. Why don't we do that? In fact, it's actually one of those things that people... I was thinking about this the other day, right? We were kind of raised up. It's not so much this way anymore, but we were raised up. There's there's three things that you do not talk about in public, right? You don't talk about money, you don't talk about politics, you don't talk about religion, right? And the reason is because it's going to end in a fight, right? And it's what ends up happening. But this used to be the thing that people did, right? You would go to the marketplace, you would meet with people, and you would talk to them, and you would argue. Argue isn't necessarily a bad thing. It means you're going to go there and put out your arguments for the faith. Hey, this is why I believe in Jesus. Remember that man that they crucified and nailed to the cross? Well, 3 days later, he rose again. And then he ascended into heaven 40 days after that. Like, that's pretty good reason. Like, take away all the other stuff away from Christianity. If the only thing you believe, if the only thing you look at is, number one, we know Jesus was a real person who lived and breathed. We know that there was a man, Jesus, who was crucified under Pontius Pilate, a Roman governor, in Jerusalem. And then by all of the eyewitness reports that we have, we hear about a resurrection that happened 3 days later. Forget all the other stuff you know about Christianity. If Jesus rose from the dead, I don't know anyone else who's done that. I don't know anyone else who can resurrect themselves from the dead. Maybe he is someone worth listening to. Maybe when he said he came to die for the sins of the world, he meant it. We need to take him seriously. And so Paul is going and he's making these arguments, right? Because this is very close after the death of Jesus. We're talking in the 40s or 50s AD. Like, this is very close after the time of the crucifixion of Jesus. And here he is. He's going out and he's preaching and he's telling them about Jesus and what has been going on and what's been happening. And so they're hearing this, and it says a group of Epicurean and Stoic philosophers began to debate with him. Some of them asked, "What is this babbler trying to say?" But others remarked, "He seems to be advocating foreign gods." He said this because Paul was preaching the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. Then they took him and brought him to the meeting of the Areopagus. Now, you guys have probably heard this referred to as something else, referred to as Mars Hill. How do we get Mars Hill out of Areopagus? Areopagus quite literally means the hill of Ares. The god Ares was the god of war, and the Roman god of war was Mars. Therefore, Mars Hill, Areopagus. That's how we got this. So have you guys heard the term Mars Hill before, like Mars Hill sermon? Yeah. So this is what this is. And the reason that this group was important is this was a group that was responsible for the civil and religious kind of life that happened in Athens. This particular, it's kind of like similar to the Sanhedrin in Jerusalem, right? The Sanhedrin didn't have any real government power, right? They couldn't change laws or anything like that. But the Sanhedrin would regulate the religious and kind of the social life of the people in Jerusalem. And so that's what we have here in Athens with the Areopagus. And so, and it's actually a real place. Tourists go there all the time. Actually, some of you went to Greece, didn't you? Did you go there? Did you go to Mars Hill? Yeah. Like it's a real place, and if you see photos of it today, it's just always covered in people because people are going there because it's such a famous site. And it says, may we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting. You are bringing some strange ideas to our ears, and we would like to know what they mean, because all Athenians and the foreigners who live there spent their time doing nothing but talking about and listening to the latest ideas. Now, I'm going to tell you a story. And I'm going to preface it with this. It's apocryphal. I don't know if it's 100% true, but it's fun, so I'm going to tell you anyway. So one of the reasons that they have all these different idols and all these different gods is because, well, it was kind of the hub of all these things, and people would come from all over the world, and they didn't want to offend any of the gods because then that god's wrath might come and be displeased with them. And we're going to come across here very shortly where Paul talks about the unknown God. And that's because this is how the story goes. Apparently, like the priest of the area, they would go up around the Areopagus, around Mars Hill, and they would release these sheep. And wherever the sheep would lay down, they would be like, aha, a god, this must be the place of a shrine. And so they would literally build a shrine to a god there. And then the priest would do whatever they did to divine whose shrine that was. But every so often, a sheep would lay down, they would build a shrine and be like, I don't understand who this is for. And so they would put to an unknown god. Now, the reason I say this is because I think a lot of times when we present this particular story, we present it as if there's only one shrine to an unknown god. But this is actually, if you go to Athens today, these still exist, and you can find more than one shrine to an unknown god because it was just, we don't know, but we don't want to offend them, so we're going to be careful, and we're going to worship them anyway. Right? This was the Athenian way because they didn't necessarily know, but what they knew was that they were encountering all these different gods from all over the world, so like there must be some we don't know about. And so Paul stood up in the meeting of the Areopagus and he said, people of Athens, I see that in every way you are religious. For I have walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship. I even found an altar with this inscription, to an unknown God. So you are ignorant of the very thing that you worship. And this is what I am going to proclaim to you. See, commonly, I'm sure many of you have heard this, and I know I certainly heard this as a younger Christian. The teaching on this was always, Paul said, you worship an unknown God, and this is him. No, this is not Paul doing that. This is Paul calling them out and going, you guys, you're not even pursuing the truth anymore. You're just worshiping your ignorance. What is going on? Right? Paul is making this, he's about to make this claim. He says, the God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth, and he does not live in temples built by human hands. He does not embody the shrine that you build. He is so much more. Everything that you see, everything you taste, touch, listen, like all these things are his creation. All the stars in the sky, the throne of heaven is his throne. He does not reside here amongst you. Right? He's calling them out and saying they're ignorant of the truth, that they've become so religious and so superstitious that they just worship their own ignorance. And this really hit me because I went, wait, do I make the same mistake? Not about necessarily worshiping my own ignorance, but am I ignorant of things that I ought not be? That I ought to spend time and learn the truth, right? If there's anything that the Bible made abundantly clear, that Jesus made abundantly clear in his teaching when he was teaching here on earth, is that the truth will set you free. But the truth is something that we must seek. We have to actually actively go and find it. We can't just expect it to be dropped in front of us. He also makes a bold claim here. He is not served by human hands as if he needed anything. Rather, he gives himself, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. Everything you see, every day that you're alive, every beat of your heart is a gift from God. I also want to make it clear as well, right? He says we can't serve him. He's not saying, look, you can't be a servant of God. What he's saying is God doesn't need anything from you. Why does God allow us to come alongside him? Why does God allow us to come and be servants of God? Because he wants relationship. It's not that we provide anything on our own. He doesn't need anything from us, but he desires that relationship with us. So he makes room for us. From one man he made all nations, that they should inhabit the whole earth. And he marked out their appointed times and histories and the boundaries of their lands. God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from any one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being. As some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring. If you notice, it does have it in there. Those are in quotes, right? For in him we live and move and have our being, and we are his offspring. These are in quotes, but this isn't a biblical quote. And Paul's doing something else here that I think is absolutely wonderful, and he's demonstrating for us how we ought to live and how we ought to encounter our culture as well. He's meeting them where they're at. He's saying, look, you've heard it said this way. And you know why it's said that way? Because of what I said to you before. He made you all. He's allowing himself to be revealed through his creation. And people are seeking him out. They're looking for truth. They're trying to find God. And it's like they're getting ever so close, but they're just missing it. Therefore, since we are God's offspring, we should not think that a divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image made by human design or skill. In the past, God overlooked such ignorance, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent. What does repent mean? It means to turn away. Turn away from the way that we've been on. Turn away from sin and turn to God. For he has set a day when he will judge the world with justice by the man that he has appointed, and he has given proof of this to everyone by raising him from the dead. And this should be a familiar picture, right? He makes the claim, Jesus rose from the dead. And when they heard about the resurrection, some of them sneered, as they still do, right? And it's wild to me because when you ask these people, right, what would it take for you to know? What would it take for you to believe? Well, and the most ridiculous version I've heard is I would want to see like camcorder video footage of the tomb of Jesus. It's like that doesn't exist, and you know it doesn't exist. That's ridiculous. Stop asking for like you have dozens of eyewitnesses. You have, and it's funny because although people don't want to. When you mention, like it says it in the Bible, they're like, well, of course it says it in the Bible. Look, these have been affirmed. These have been confirmed. Like we know these documents date back to then. We know that these were written by eyewitnesses. And we know that those eyewitnesses all went to their death still believing. People don't die for a lie. When they went out and they claimed, we saw Jesus risen from the grave. And you've heard me say this time and time again as well. It's not like they were super brave and they thought that Jesus was going to rise from the dead because they all ran away. They all disappeared. And it was Mary who went to the tomb and that first received the vision. First had it revealed to them that Jesus was alive. It was then after that, after the women had been shown, then Peter went and finally had the bravery to go, wait a minute, that thing that Jesus told me, that thing where he said that I would be dead and I would come back to life on the third day, that happened? Friends, if the claims in the Gospels aren't true, then it makes them look foolish for nothing. Why wouldn't they make themselves look so much better if it were a lie? I know I would. I wouldn't talk about the time where I denied Christ. I wouldn't talk about the time where we all went and hid in fear because we figured, oh, you know what, all this big talk. But Jesus is alive. He did resurrect from the dead. And although the world may sneer, as it says, others also said this, we want to hear you again on this subject. Wait, there's a guy who resurrected? We got to know more. At that, Paul left the council, and some of the people became followers of Paul and believed. And among them was Dionysius, a member of the Areopagus, and also a woman, Damaris, and a number of others. Paul was bold. He was brave. He went right into the field of battle against his enemy. And he boldly declared, you know what? That Jesus that I encountered, that Jesus that I persecuted his followers as well, that Jesus, he changed my life. And friends, if we've had that kind of same encounter, if you can say to me today that yes, Jesus has changed your life, that you know that you were going in one direction and then Jesus spun you about, that Jesus corrected your course, that Jesus changed you from the inside out, then you have just as powerful a testimony as Paul does. You don't have to be an ex-murderer to have a powerful testimony. All of us know what it is to have that powerful experience. And I think, and as it's been said before, I think this is true. You can present someone with all the evidence in the world. I can tell them about Jesus. I can tell them that he died. I can tell them that he resurrected. I can tell them that he came and he did all this for their sins, that justice must be paid. I can tell them all these things, and I can lay out the facts. I can lay out all the arguments. I can give them all the arguments for God's existence. I can give them all the arguments for the validity of Christ and the validity of the testimony of the Gospels. I can give them all of this, but at the end of the day, what they really need is to take that step of faith and finally experience God for themselves, hear his voice, feel his tenderness. Because, as many of us here can attest to, once you take that step, once you allow God in your life in that way, the touch of God is unmistakable and unforgettable. Many of us even know people that have fallen away from the church, but they can remember that moment. And maybe they got some mixed up ideas about why they can't come back or whatever, but they remember those moments. Sometimes they even try and rationalize them away because they don't want to deal with it. But we know that those moments are powerful. They're life-changing. But it's not because of anything Paul did. It's not because of anything we do. All we do is let people know, hey, here's the option before you. You imagine if you went to the doctor and the doctor said, yeah, you need some medicine, now go home. But he didn't tell you what medicine you needed. You'd be a little irritated. The people of this world know that there's a problem. They know that there's an issue. And the answer is, we have the cure. And we got to let them know. Hey, it's Jesus. Whether or not you take that medicine, that's up to you. Whether or not you actually go out and allow him to change your life, that's up to you. That's not on you. It's not on you to get people saved. It's on you to let them know, hey, there's a free gift of salvation. And as you can see here, and to be honest, this is my biggest assurance because I talk to a lot of people about Jesus, and it can be really disheartening, and it can almost be upsetting when you see people just outwardly, boldly reject it based on ignorance. They're not even willing to consider the facts or the evidence. They're not even willing to listen or to read. I've had people argue with me about things from the Bible that aren't in the Bible. They just don't know. It can be dissuading, but I look at what Paul went through, I look at what he's going through, and I say, you know what, for the sake of the few that he saved in that council meeting, right? We're not reading about thousands, we're not reading about a whole conversion, we're not reading about a miraculous overturning of the entire old religious structure in Athens, but we're reading about seeds that were planted and lives that ended up getting changed. And are we ready to be that kind of bold today? Not worry about whether or not we're rejected, not worry about whether or not we're going to be punished or removed, but worry about whether or not we get that cure into everyone's hands. So at least then they have the choice. Do they take the medicine?